Good morning, crime community. I'm here to continue to read Edgar Allan Poe. We're in the Rationale of verse. It will be observed that I speak a merely proximate equality between the first syllable of dutiful and of beautiful, and it may be asked why we cannot imagine the earliest rhymes to have had absolute instead of proximate equality of sound. But absolute equality would have been involved the useful identical words, and it is the duplicate sameness of monotony, that of sense as well of that of sound, which would have caused these rhythms to be rejected in the first instance. The narrowness of the limits within which verse composed of natural feet alone must necessarily have been confined, which would have led, after a very brief interval, to the trivial and immediate adoption of artificial feet, that is to say, of feet not constituted each of a single word, but two or even three words, or of parts of words. These feet would be intermingled with natural ones. For example, a breath can make them as a breath has made. This is iambic line in which each iambus is formed of two words. Again, the un ima gina able might of Jove. This is an iambic line in which the first foot is formed of a word and part of a word, and the second and third of part of taken from the body of interior of a word. The fourth of a part of the whole, the fifth of two complete words. There are no natural feet in either lines. Again, can it be fancied that deity ever been distinctively made in his image a mannequin, merely to madden it? These are two didactic lines of which we find natural feet, deity, mannequin, 2 feet composed of two words, fancy that, imagine a, merely to, madden it, 2 feet composed of three words, can it be made in his, a foot composed of a part of a word, dictively, and a foot composed of a word and part of a word, ever been. And now in our supposititious progress, we have gone so far so as to exhaust all the essentialities of verse. What follows may, strictly speaking, may be regarded as embellishment merely, but even in this embellishment, the rudimental sense of equality would have been the never-ceasing impulse. It would, for example, be simply in seeking further administration to this sense that men would come in time to think of the refrain or burden, where at the closes of the several stanzas of a poem and one or phrase is repeated, and of alliteration in those simplest forms of consonant is repeated in the commencements of various words. This effect would be extended so as to embrace repetition both of vowels and of consonants in the body as well as in the beginning of words, and as a latter period would have made it infringe upon the province of rhyme by the introduction of general similarities of sounds between whole feet occurring in the body of a line, all of which modifications I have exemplified in the line above. Made in his large image a mannequin merely to madden it. Further cultivation would approve also the refrain by relieving its monotone and slightly varying the phrase of each repetition, or as I have attempted to do in the Raven, in refraining the phrase and varying its application, although this latter point is not strictly a rhythmical effect alone. Finally, poets, when fairly worried about following precedent, follow it with more closely and less than perceived it in company with reason, would be adventurous so far as to indulge in positive rhyme at other points than the ends of lines. First, they would be in the middle of the line, then at some point where the multiple would be less obvious. Then, alarmed at their own audacity, they would undo all their work by cutting these lines in two. And here is the fruitful source of the infinity of short meter, in which modern poetry is not distinguished as at least disgraced. It would require a high degree, indeed, both of cultivation and of courage on the part of the versifier to enable him to make his rhymes and let them remake at unquestionably that their position, that of unusual and unanticipated intervals. An account of the stupidity of some people, or even of talent, may be more respectable word, on account of their talent for misconception. I think it necessary to add here first that I believe the process above detailed to be nearly or as accurately which for those which did occur in the gradual creation of what we now call verse. Secondly, that although I so believe, I yet urge neither the assumed fact, nor my belief as a part of the true propositions of this paper. Thirdly, that in regard to the aim of this paper, as is to no consequence whether these processes did occur either in the order I have assigned them or at all, the design being simply in presenting a general type of that which processes might have been and have resembled to help them. In some people, it is easy to understand of what I have further to say on the topic of verse. This is one point of which, in my summary of the processes, I have purposely forbone to touch, because of this point being the most important of all, on account of the immensity of error usually involved in the consideration, which have led me into a series of detailed inconsistent with the object of a summary. Every reader of verse must have observed how seldom it happens that even at any line proceeds uniformly with a succession, such as I have supposed, of absolutely equal feet, that is to say, with a succession of iambuses only, or of the trotchkis only, of dactyls only, of the anapaests only, of the spondies only. Even in the most musical lines, we find the cessation interrupted. The iambic parameters of Pope, for example, will be found in examination frequently varied by trotchkis in the beginning, or by what seem to be anapaests in the body of the line. O thou, what verti te please thine ear, din tra blar blek esta egu virver. In any one week, enough to refer to the prosodies for the solution of this difficulty here, we would find it solved, as usual, by a rule stating the fact, or what it, the rule, supposes to be the fact, but without the slightest attempt at the rationale, by a cincinnatus of the two short syllables, says the books. An anapaest may sometimes be employed for an iambus, or a didactyl for a trotchki. In the beginning of a line of a trotchki, it is often used for an iambus. Blending is the plain English verse for sincerus, but there should be no blending. Neither is an anapaest ever involved in an iambus or a didactyl for a trotchki. These feet different in time, and no feet so differing can ever be legitimately used in the same line. An anapaest is equal to 4 short syllables, and iambus only to 3. Diactyls and trotchkis hold the same relation. The principle of equality in the verse admits, it is true, of variation of certain points for the relief of monotone, as I have already shown, at the point of time, and that point which, being the rudimental one, must never be tampered with at all. To explain in further efforts of the relief of the monotone from those to which I have alluded in the summary, men soon to seem to come there was no absolute necessity for adhering to the precise number of syllables, provided the time required for the whole foot was preserved inviolate. They saw, for instance, that in such a line as or laugh and shake in Rab Elias esse share, the equalization of the 3 syllables Elias ea with the 2 syllables composing of the other feet could only be readily effected by pronouncing the 2 syllables Elias and double quick time. By pronouncing each of the syllables e and lias twice as rapidly as the syllable psi and the syllable in, and any other syllable that could bring the 2 of them take together to the length, as is to say, to the time of any one short syllable, the consideration enabled them to effect the agreeable variation of 3 syllables in place of the uniform 2. A variation was the object variation to the ear. The same sense is there, then, in supposing the object rendered null by the blending of the 2 syllables so as to render them in absolute effect one. Of course, there must be no blending. Each syllable must be pronounced as distinctly as possible, or the refrain is lost, with the twice of rapidity in which the ordinary syllable is enunciated. That the syllables alias e do not compose of anapaests is evident, and the signs of their accentuation are erroneous. The foot may be written thus, the inverted crescents expressing double quick time, and might be called the bastard iambus. Here is a trotchki line. See the delicate-footed reindeer. The prosodies, that is to say, the most considerate of them, would have decided that delicate is the dactyl used in place of the trotchki, and rather to what they call their rule for justification. Others, varying the stupidity, would insist upon the Prodecrucian adjustment that delicate, and adjustment recommended of all such words as slivery, murmuring, etc., which it is said should not be only pronounced but written silvery and murmuring, and so on, whenever they find themselves in trochaic predicament. I have only to say that delicate, when the circumstance as above is near a didactyl nor a didactyl equivalent, that I would suggest for it the accentuation that I think it is well to call it a bastard Trotsky, and that all words and all events should be written and pronounced in full and as nearly as possible as nature intended them. About 11 years ago, there appeared in the American Monthly magazine, then edited, I believe, by Messrs. Hoffman and Benjamin, a review of Mr. Wilson's poems, the critic putting forth his strength or his weakness in the endeavor to show that the poet was either absurdly affected or grossly ignorant in the laws of verse, and the accusation of being based altogether in the fact that Mr. W. made occasional use of this very word delicate and other similar words in the heroic measure, which everyone knew consisted of feet of 2 syllables. Mr. W. has often, for example, such lines as, that binds him in a woman's delicate love, in the gay sunshine, reverent in the storm, with the invisible fingers, my loose hair. Here, of course, the feet, litigate love, the variant in, and the Sybil Finn are bastard iambuses and are not anapasts and are not improperly used. The employment of the contrary by Mr. Willis is but one of immeasurable instances. He has given a keen sensibility to those matters of taste which may be classed under the general head of fanciful and embellishment. It is also about 11 years ago that I'm not mistaken about since Mr. Holmes of England and the author of Orion, one of the noblest epics in any language, thought it necessary to preface his Chaucer modernized by a very long and evidently a very elaborate essay, of which the greater portion was occupied in a discussion of the seemingly anomalous foot of which we have been speaking. Mr. Horn upholds Chaucer as a frequent use, maintains his superiority on account of his so frequently used it over all English versifiers, and indigently repelling the common idea of those who make verse in their fingers, that of the superfluous syllable of a roughness and an error, very chivalrously make battle for its as grace, that grace it is, there can be no doubt, and what I complain of is that the author of the most happily versed long poem in the existence should be under the necessity of discussing the grace merely as a grace through 40 or 50 vague pages, solely because of the inability to show how and why it is grace, by which showing the question which have been settled in an instant. Absolute about the Trotskys used for the iambus, as we see in the beginnings of the line, whether thou choosest Cervantes' serious air. There is little that need to be said. It brings me to the general proposition that in all rhymes and prevalent of distinctive feet may be varied at will and nearly at random by the occasional introduction of equivalent feet, that is to say, feet the sum of those syllable times of equal to the sum of the syllabic times of the distinctive feet. Thus, the Trotsky, whether is equal to the sum of the times of the syllables, to the iambus, thou chose to the sum of the times, it is the syllables, each foot being in time equal to 3 short syllables. Good verifiers will happen to be also good poets, contrive to relieve the monotone of the series of feet by the use of the equivalent feet only at rare intervals and at each point of their subject, as seems in accordance with the startling character of the variation. Nothing of the care, it seems, in the line quoted above, although Pope has some fine instances of the duplicate effect, where vehemence is to be strongly expressed. I am not sure that he would be wrong in venturing on 2 consecutive equivalent feet, although I cannot say that I have ever known the adventure made, except in the following passages, which occurs in Al Arif, the boyish poem written by myself when a boy. I am referring to the sudden and rapid advent of a star. Dim was its little disk and angel eyes. Alone could see the phantom of the skies, when first the phantom's course was found to be headlong hitherward o'er the merry sea. In the general proposition above, I speak of the occasional introduction of equivalent feet. It sometimes happens that unskillful versifiers, about knowing what they do or what they do it, introduce so many variations as to exceed in number the distinctive feet, and the ear becomes one balked by the boulevardment of the rhythm. Too many tchotchkes, for example, inserted in iambic rhythm would convert the latter to a triac. I may note here that in all cases the rhythm design should be commenced and considered without variation until the ear has had full time to comprehend what is the rhyme. In violation of the rule so obviously founded in common sense, even of our best poets do not scruple to begin an iambic rhythm with a tchotchke or the converse, or a didactylic with an anapest or the converse, and so on. A somewhat less objectionable error, although still a decided one, is that of commencing a rhythm not with a different equivalent foot, but with a bastard foot of a rhymed instead. For example, many a thought will come to memory. For many a is what I have explained to be a bastard tchotchke, and to be understood should be accentuated with inverted crescents. It is an objectable solely on account of its position in the opening foot of the trichaic rhythm. Memory, similarly accented, is also a bastard tchotchke, but objectionable, although by no means demanded. The further illustration of this point will enable me to take an important step. One of the finest poets, Mr. Christopher Pierce Cranch, began a very beautiful poem thus: "Many are the thoughts that come to me in my lonely musing, and they drift so strange and swift, there's no time for choosing, which to follow, for to leave, and seems a losing to Mr. Crouch, of course, but this en passant, and it will be seen here that the intention is trochaic, although we do not see this intention by the opening foot, as we should do, or even by the opening line. Reading the whole stanza, however, we perceive the trochaic rhythm as the general design, and so after some reflection, we divide the first lines thus: many are the thoughts that come to me. Thus scanned, the line will be musical. It is a highly so, and it is because there is no end to instances of such lines or apparent incomprehensible music that Coleridge thought proper to invent his nonsensical systems of what we call scanning by accents or by scanning of accents were anything more than a phrase. Wherever Cristobal is really not rough, it will be readily scanned by the true laws of the superstitious rules of verse that can be the simplest parameter of Pope, and where it is the rough passion that these same laws will enable anyone of common sense to show why it is rough and to the point out instantly the remedy of the roughness. The reads and rereads of certain lines and the pronounces it false in rhythm, unmusical. B, however, it reads to the A, and A, as is once struck with the perfection of the rhyme and the wonders of the dullness, if not catching it before, henceforward he admits that the line to be musical. B, triumphant, asserts that to be sure that the line is musical, and it is the work of Coleridge, and that is A who is not, and the fault of being in A's false reading. And now here A is right and B wrong. That rhythm is erroneous, and at some point of the other more or less obvious, which is an ordinary readers can, without design, read improperly. And it is the business of the poet so to construct his line that the intention must be caught at once. Even when these men have precisely the same understanding of the sentence, they differ and often widely in their modes of enunciating it. Any one of these taken the trouble to examine the topic of emphasis, by which I mean not accent of particular syllables, but the dwelling of the entire words, must have seen that men emphasize the most singularly arbitrary manner. There are no certain large classes of people, for example, who persist in emphasizing the monosyllables. Little uniformity of emphasis prevails because the thing itself, the idea's emphasis, is referable to no natural, at least to no well comprehended and therefore uniform law. Beyond a very narrow and vague limit, the whole matter is conventionality. And if we differ in emphasis, even when we agree on comprehension, we much more so in the former when in the latter too. Apart, however, from the consideration of the natural disagreement, it is not clear that the tripling here and mounting there any sequence of words may be twisted into any species of rhythm. But are we thence to deduce that all sequences of words are rhythmical in a rational understanding of the term? And this is the deduction precisely in which the reductio ad absurdum will be in the end, bringing all the proportions of Coleridge. One of the 100 readers of Cristobal 50 will be able to make nothing of its rhythm, while 49 of the remaining 50 will, with some ado, fancy they comprehended after the fourth or fifth perusal. The one out of the whole 100, and who shall both comprehend and admire it at first sight, must be an unaccountably clever person. And I am by far too modest to assume that the moment that very clever person is myself. An illustration of what is here advanced, I cannot do better than quote a poem. And we will leave that poem for tomorrow. I think I've bored you enough for today. I want to read one more poem if I can. This is, of course, a poem by the three sisters of the Bronte sisters. I'm going to read a poem by Emily Bronte called Remembrance. Cold in the earth and the deep snow piled above thee, far, far removed, cold in the dreary grave, for I forgot my only love to love thee, severed at last by time's all-severing wave. Now when alone, do my thoughts no longer hover over the mountains on that northern shore, resting their wings, their heath and fern leaves cover, the noble heart forever, evermore. Cold in the earth, the 15 wild Decembers, from the brown hills, the melting into spring, faithful indeed in the spirit that remembers, for each years of change and suffering. Sweet love of youth, forgive as I forgive thee, while the world's tides is bearing me along, others decries, other hopes beset me, hopes which obscure but cannot do thee wrong. No latter light has lightened up my heaven, no second morn has ever shone for me. All my life's bliss from the dear life was given, all my life's bliss in the grave with thee. But when the days of golden dreams had perished, and even despair was powerless to destroy, and did I learn how existence could be cherished, strengthened and fed without the aid of joy, then did I cheek the tears of useless passion, weaned my young soul from yearning after thine, sternly denied its burning wish to hasten down to that tomb already more than mine. And even yet I dare not let it languish, dare not indulge in memory's rapturous pain. Once drinking deep in the divinest anguish, how could I seek the empty world again? That is the last of today's lesson. We will leave tomorrow of the Poetry of Prose lessons for tomorrow. Please like and share and have a nice day.